Hi. Welcome back, everyone in the room and everyone online. We are about to have the guest lecture for this 22nd annual postgraduate symposium, combined here with the APGRD and the University of London. I'm Justine McConnell. I'm on the APGRD Advisory Board, and I'm a senior lecturer in comparative literature at King's College London. And it's a real pleasure today to introduce our guest lecturer, Margherita Laera. Everyone here at the APGRD has been really excited about Margherita's work for 10 years now, nearly, particularly since the publication of her first book, Reaching Athens, in 2013. Margherita Laera is a senior lecturer in drama and theatre at the University of Kent, as well as being a professional arts journalist and a theatre translator. Her research focuses on translation and adaptation for the stage, as well as on contemporary European performance. And as well as that first book that I mentioned, so the full title, for those who don't yet know it, is Reaching Athens, Community, Democracy, and Other Mythologies in Adaptations of Greek Tragedy. As well as that, she's also the author of Theatre and Translation from 2019, and the editor of Theatre and Adaptation, Return, Rewrite, Repeat from 2014. And today she's going to speak to us on Antigone in Palermo. So, Margherita, over to you.
Thank you so much for this introduction and for inviting me to speak at the symposium. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to have you've offered me to return to Greek tragedy after a few years. As you know, my first monograph, Reaching Athens, published in 2013, was a critique of Western theatre's obsession with Greek tragedy and of the public sphere discourses that continue to position it as a myth of origin for Western democracies and European subjectivities, often underpinning conceptions of Western superiority. Back then, I was interested in understanding how the mechanism of the classical had become foundational to the construction of the post-war European self. And my aim was to demythologize Greek tragedy. Returning to that publication after a long time, I realized that back then I didn't have the right vocabulary for many of the issues at stake. Here, however, I returned to Greek tragedy after 10 transformational years as a researcher in the field of theatre studies, spent investigating the areas of intersection between performance and modern languages, interrogating where and how ethical intercultural encounters can happen through theatre. I have written about contemporary playwriting, theatre translation, adaptation, multilingual performance, and contemporary theatre by Black and global majority makers in Italy. In this paper, all of these interests will collide. This is a story about a Black Italian writer and a white Italian director staging Antigone together in Palermo, with a company of professional and non-professional actors, professional musicians, and also refugees and asylum seekers at their first theatrical experience. This is a story about soft power relationships, sometimes unspoken, sometimes unseen, about cultures meeting, clashing, interweaving, spilling over each other, some surviving, only just, some succumbing, unnoticed. In this paper, I'm indebted to Black and global majority theatre makers and colleagues in theatre and performance studies in the US and the UK, who have done the hard emotional labour of pushing the decolonial agenda to the forefront of our field over the past decade. In this paper, I do my best to take on board some of the lessons I have learned from them. Antigone Power is an adaptation of Sophocles' Antigone written by Somali-Italian writer Ubah Cristina Ali Farah, which reimagines the clash between Antigone and Creon against the backdrop of the 2014 refugee crisis. This was a commission to Ali Farah from Palermo-based multicultural company Sutta Scupa, and it was staged over 2 nights in Palermo at Quartieri della Zisa, directed by Italian theatre maker Giuseppe Massa in July 2018. This paper centers on an artistic disagreement between Ali Farah and Massa over the presentation of Creon's character and his interactions with Antigone, which in my reading of the production encapsulate an important power dynamic around the representation of race relations in Italian theatre and society. In addressing the themes proposed by today's gathering, survival and disobedience, I am drawn to ask, whose survival are we talking about? Whose disobedience? And to what rules? By discussing the script by Ali Farah and the staging by Massa, I will offer some thoughts on the persistence of racism and racist stereotyping in Italian theatre and society, and draw urgent attention to the reproduction of these power structures within my case study. How is it possible that Ali Farah's Antigone Power, in which a strong woman dies by confronting a brutal tyrant, might become a sort of Antigone Powerless in performance, a woman vilified, exoticized, objectified, and abused by that very tyrant? Looking back at histories of Italian colonialism and their inextricable connection to the so-called migrant crisis, I ask whether and how it might be possible to use Greek tragedy in Italian theatre today to highlight and ultimately topple racism, rather than reenact it, albeit with good intentions of hospitality and openness towards migrants. I argue that it is vital that a reflection on these themes is carried out in the Italian public sphere as soon as possible. Greek tragedy is able to function as a prestigious platform that can help convey reflections on these themes, provided that narratives center positive representations of Afro-Italians and their stories, so as to counter centuries of appropriation and misrepresentation. Let me start by introducing the playwright and her work. Ubah Cristina Ali Farah is a poet, essayist, novelist, dramatist, and activist. She was born in Verona, Italy, in 1973 from a Somali father and an Italian mother. She moved to Somalia at a young age and grew up in Mogadishu, where she was educated at an Italian school, a relic of Italy's colonial rule in the country. Ali Farah moved back to Italy in 1991 at the outbreak of the Somali civil war as a young mother with her baby. She obtained a PhD in popular Somali theatre at Napoli L'Orientale University, then taught Somali language and culture at Roma III University for a few years, alongside developing her career as a writer. Ali Farah has published novels, short stories, and poems in several anthologies, and has also worked in theatre as a playwright and librettist. She writes in Italian and is currently based in Brussels. Her first novel, Madre Piccola, Little Mother, about two Somali women, two cousins, whose friendship is put to the test when one moves to Italy, was awarded the prestigious Vittorini Prize. Her second novel, Il Comandante del Fiume, The Commander of the River, is a Bildungsroman about a Somali boy growing up in Italy, told through the lens of Somali legends. Her third novel, Le Stazioni della Luna, The Stations of the Moon, examines interweaving stories of Italian and Somali women in Mogadishu in the 1950s, at the time when Somalia was an Italian protectorate and on its way towards independence. Ali Farah approached Greek tragedy under commission, but was immediately enthusiastic about using myth to draw attention to the ongoing African diaspora, given her fondness of Somali legends and oral poetry and her familiarity with ancient Greek classics through her Italian education. Most of Ali Farah's characters are part of the Somali diaspora in Italy. They were exposed to the trauma of displacement and forced to renegotiate their identity in a new world. Ali Farah's novels are animated by the question, how can one survive when one has lost all points of reference? Together with Ethiopian writer and performer Gabriella Germandi and Somali novelist and activist Ijiaba Shego, Ali Farah is part of a generation of Italian feminist post-colonial writers whose stories focus on the section of the African diaspora that was directly caused by Italian colonialism. As the bearer of historical memory that has been removed from Italy's social consciousness, Ali Farah's work plays a crucial role in Italian literature, theatre, and society. As her novels attest, over the post-war period, Italian power structures have been able to enact a form of social amnesia vis-à-vis the country's colonial history, removing any sense of historical responsibility from public consciousness. During a panel discussion at the University of Melbourne, Ali Farah compared her role as a storyteller to that of a bridge between Italy and Somalia. When she first moved back to Italy in 1991, she hoped that the country of her birth would recognize her as a citizen, but faced erasure instead. At one point in my life, she says, I thought that I had the opportunity to listen to all these stories, and somehow I felt the responsibility to try to be this bridge between Italy and Somalia, because this colonial history was not recognized. Italians were not aware at all that they had this long history with Somalia. They would ask me, where are you from? And why do you speak Italian? I was shocked at the beginning that Italians did not know their history, when my father and all his generation were educated in Italian and they knew everything about Italy, and Italians didn't know anything about Somalia. Ali Farah is all too aware that, that she operates within a white majority field, both in literature and in theatre. But literature offers her the freedom to address readers of African heritage worldwide and those who share her concerns and experience. In the theatre, however, things are different. Theatre in Italy is a white-dominated space that global majority Italian feel does not belong to them. Endemic forms of racism and an inability to examine historical responsibility in relation to our own colonial past have led to rampant stereotypes, appropriation, and Orientalism in Italian theatre. When Italian theatre makers work with global majority collaborators, it is mostly within the genre of applied theatre, or teatro sociale, especially through the workshops with refugees and asylum seekers or vulnerable individuals who are positioned as needing the theatre to overcome trauma. To see Black Italians in positions of power in Italian theatre, for instance, as directors, writers, artistic directors, or producers, is extremely rare. But this does not mean that Black Italian theatre directors and playwrights do not exist. They do exist. In light of this context, the collaboration between Ali Farah and Sutta Scupa is an important case study that demands careful attention. Palermo-based theatre company Sutta Scupa specializes in applied theatre with mixed casts of professional actors working with migrants and refugees. The company is known for its collaborations with local charities, asylum seeker, host centres, and Afro-Italian cultural associations in Palermo. For this production, Sutta Scupa worked with Centro Stalli, a welcome centre for refugees and asylum seekers, Astrummola and Corda Pazza, two NGOs specialising in social inclusion and intercultural dialogue through art projects and education, Città Invisibili, a centre providing writing workshops and art therapy for all, and UNIS, Unions of Ivorians in Italy. The immediate context for Ali Farah's collaboration with Massa and Sutta Scupa was the aftermath of the so-called migrant crisis, which started in 2014. In 2018, the Italian government's stance on migrant and refugee arrivals by sea had become openly xenophobic, with the populist far-right Northern League politician Matteo Salvini serving as Home Secretary. Salvini, who is very active on social media, created the hashtag Chiudiamo I porti, close the ports, banking on populist narratives of reverse colonialism, which characterize African and Asian refugees as invaders and looters. In the summer of 2018, Salvini had decided to close the ports to NGO search and rescue ships requesting docking, justifying this by saying that NGOs were actually helping human trafficking by acting like the Meds taxi service. As Achille Mbembe has argued in his seminal work, Necropolitics, the ultimate expression of sovereignty resides to a large degree in the power and the capacity to dictate who can live and who must die. By letting black and brown bodies die in the Mediterranean, European leaders demonstrate their conception of non-white refugees as less than living and therefore expendable. The reality is that, of course, NGOs are compelled to intervene to save lives, given the huge power vacuum left by the EU's indifference and loopholes in international law. Too many would lose their lives if the matter was left in the hands of national governments, and if NGOs did not risk jail by practicing civic disobedience. Ali Farah had never written for the theatre when Sutta Scupa's Giuseppe Massa called her to invite her to adapt Antigone for his company in 2018. After setting up Sutta Scupas to facilitate migrants' integration into Italian society, Massa was motivated to work with an Italian writer of the African diaspora. Ali Farah's work stood out to him, and after being in touch, according to both, a strong friendship emerged, and long hours were spent on the phone discussing shared vision for the adaptation, along with previous rewritings of Antigone by European and African writers. Among the themes of these early conversations, Massa mentioned civic disobedience as being the most important. Antigone's gesture of rebellion to power mapped on to current sentiments in relation to the attitude of the Italian government towards migrants' boats reaching Italian waters. In an interview, Massa stressed how the etymology of Palermo comes from pan ermos, all port, and stressed Sicily's millennial history of intercultural encounters lying at the crossroads of Afro-European trading routes. Early workshops for Antigone Power were conducted to involve a community of migrants and refugees around the themes of the play, in particular civic disobedience, which captured the participants' imagination. Each shared stories of their own acts of disobedience against unjust power structures, and the participants were, of course, refugees and recent arrivals. Ali Farah's Italian script was used as a springboard for discussion, translation, and rewriting, rather than as a fixed and non-negotiable point of reference, and was heavily edited in rehearsals by Massa and dramaturg Margherita Ortolani. The final cast was selected through these artistic development workshops, where particularly talented and engaged individuals were found. During rehearsals, all cast members were paid for their work, and Massa stressed an ethos of professionalism, contributing to a sense of dignity and respect underpinning the company's project of integration. Massa was keen to include the refugees' native languages, their own words and vision for the characters. Palermitan dialect, spoken by Tiresias, and Italian with southern inflections were also utilized in the show, and so the final performance included 4 languages: Isan, a language spoken in the Edo region of Nigeria, and Nigerian Pidgin, and then Palermitan dialect, and Italian. Every language was subtitled in Italian. Ali Farah joined rehearsals 10 days before the opening. When most artistic decisions had been made, the tension was starting to build, and very little could still be changed. When I interviewed Ali Farah and Massa in June 2022, they were candid about how much they had argued during those 10 days prior to the opening, owing to disagreements on artistic decisions. They also commented that they had each tried to compromise, and that their friendship and desire to keep working together had been left unscathed. One key point of clash between Massa and Ali Farah was the depiction of Creon as an arrogant and lecherous villain, which significantly departed from Ali Farah's cruel, yet more dignified statesman. I believe this disagreement between writer and director encapsulates a crucial collision of perspectives and ideological positionings. Far from being simply about characterization, the significance of their clash extends to the foundations of traditional hierarchies and power relationships that underpin identity formation and govern both intimate encounters and their possible representation at the theatre. I would like to propose that this clash between Ali Farah and Massa is about survival, not of Antigone, the heroine who is condemned to death by her tyrant, not of Creon, who is the only one to remain alive at the end of the play, not of those migrants crossing the Mediterranean in search of refuge in Europe, including those who played in this production. What is at stake here is the survival of the architecture of power that props up Italy's structurally racist value system. In order to clarify and corroborate my argument, I propose to take a step back to analyse Ali Farah's drama. I will then move on to investigate what, if anything, survived of her offering in performance. The play takes place in Thebes, a city on the seashore where a group of seafarers whose ship has just sank have tried to settle, causing a war between two brothers. Similarly to the Sophoclean drama, the conflict between Antigone and Creon revolves around whether Polynices should be allowed a burial, given that he sided with the seafarers, whom Creon depicts as invaders. While Antigone calls for peace, denouncing the absurdity of wars, Tiresias delivers her soothsaying by promoting the values of hospitality and historical responsibility and memory. The play's message of love and generosity is delivered by two strong women, Antigone and Tiresias, while the despot, Creon, and his proxies, the chorus and guards, are increasingly isolated by their own toxic masculinity. The only positive male character is Haemon, who joins his fiancée Antigone in the cave that will become their tomb, annihilated by male violence. In Ali Farah's adaptation, Thebes is a mythical version of Palermo, but also of Mogadishu. Echoes of current migrations and past crossings of the Mediterranean in both directions can be found throughout the play, and any readings focusing on one of these two settings only would restrict its rich symbolism. It is precisely by establishing this fertile in-between land that Ali Farah best performs her mission as a bridge between Italy and Somalia. Upon reading Ali Farah's script, I was struck by its gentle tempo. The slow sentences, abundant with visual metaphors and similes, make Ali Farah's speeches more similar to Sophoclean language than most Italian contemporary playwriting. In Ali Farah's speech and script, time flows as a gentle sea breeze, reminding one of the stillness and precision of Cesare Pavese's Dialoghi con Leucò, the dialogues with Leucò. The dialogues are a collection of short, meandering exchanges between mythical characters in which the likes of Oedipus and Tiresias, Achilles and Patroclus discuss themes such as childhood, memory, sorrow, fragility, sex, and death. Both works envisage a kind of theatricality that would require spectators to enter a kind of temporality and practice a kind of listening that are rarely established at the theatre. This is not a play for the short attention spans of social media users. This is a challenging, robust play that presupposes an audience capable of recovering shared Afro-Italian historical memory. Ali Farah's offering requires a renegotiation of Italian readers' and audiences' historical situatedness. The action opens with the chorus exposition of the state of affairs. Two brothers, Eteocles and Polynices, have just killed each other on the beach and are lying on the sand with their bodies intertwined. Eteocles was defending the city from so-called invaders, while Polynices sided with the seafarers. The chorus characterizes Polynices as arrogant and clearly supports Eteocles' actions for protecting our borders from the invaders. A dialogue between Tiresias, a woman seer, and the chorus immediately follows, where Tiresias warns the chorus that the inconsistent blah, blah, blah of charlatans is confusing their thinking. What matters, Tiresias says, what matters most is peace. Because during the war, children die and vultures fill their bellies with young people's flesh. When the chorus replies with arrogance, Tiresias prophesies a future of displacement and sorrow for Thebes, and those who reject the displaced of today. As the voice of truth in the play, this feminist anti-colonial Tiresias delivers the most moving passages of the play. This is Tiresias' speech. The seafarers shall arrive by the thousands on board of wooden vessels, fleeing colonial ports. They will bring their children and wives, dates and unleavened bread, a holy book in their pocket to protect them from fate. They shall alight in Thebes, wearing Chinese t-shirts and plastic sandals, and they shall ask to be recognized for what they are, old brothers with their children, and dates instead of figs. Humble clandestine migrants, always weak, always victims, culpable, always subjects, who, like you, only want to live and dream and lie down in the sun with their skin refreshed by dew. And if you do not adapt your laws to theirs, if you keep chasing them away like lepers, then a deluge of crimes shall envelop Thebes, war and plague and no more peace. It is through the metaphor of dried fruit of choice, fig or date, that the cultural differences between migrants and natives are described and thus reduced to a matter of little importance. Creon, on the other hand, announces Thebes' victory against the seafarers, whom he calls foreigners and terrorists, and warns that there are still rats in the city who would prefer to prioritize the foreigners' well-being over that of their fellow citizens. For that reason, he proclaims that the dissident Polynices will not be allowed a burial, and asks the chorus to help him cleanse the city of those who oppose his laws. The dialogue between Antigone and Ismene, in which Antigone tries to get her sister on board with the plan of burying their brother Polynices, is infused with Ali Farah's own experience as a Somali exile. The two sisters support each other despite disagreeing on what to do about their sibling's body. Antigone is the wanderer, the idealistic migrant pioneer who acts in the present, while Ismene is the one who stays behind in the motherland. This way, Thebes is also the Mogadishu that the author fled, and where many others stayed. Ali Farah noted in an interview that when natives of a country migrate abroad, those who stay think of those who left will have a nice and easy life, while those who have fled think those who have stayed are the lucky ones. Memories of past trauma and oppression are palpable, while the sisters discuss what strategy to adopt. Ismene: Antigone, I understand you. You follow our father's example, but his idealism, his dreams, are for me a wrong kind of heroism. You know it is not in my nature to die for ideas. Antigone: You are younger. You have seen fewer horrors. It is not enough to ignore the past for it to remain the past. Ismene: Listen to me. Wait. You know that among the people, many are against the sacrilege that Creon is about to carry out. Only they do not dare to oppose his will. Let us summon an assembly. Let us show them that the citizens are on our side. Antigone: There is no time for politics. When I was on the road, I did not know where I was going. I followed Oedipus, who occupied my whole past and absorbed my entire future. There was only the present, and it is always in the present that I have lived. The present means not to have time for projects. There is certainly less rancor towards Ismene in Ali Farah's Antigone, who is moved at her sister's suggestion that their children might one day play together on Thebes beach. I will do this for you, for your children, for the future which you embody, Antigone tells Ismene. Antigone is then caught by a guard, pouring sand from an amphora on Polynices' body, and her act is witnessed by the chorus. When she is brought to Creon and asked to justify her actions, she is defiant. Initially, Creon tries to save Antigone by asking her to publicly repent, but she refuses and speaks truth to power, accusing the chorus of being blinded by his lies. In Antigone's words, Creon is the epitome of the tyrant who clings to power through violence, who is only in power because he is capable of killing, and who measures his manliness by brutality, echoing Italy's Mussolini and Salvini, but also Somalia's Siad Barre. Antigone: You invoke unity and yet live in discord. Know that violence invokes violence. When you exert it on others, yours are affected too. Must you always kill? Are you less of a man if you don't? Enemies, motherlands, pretexts will never go missing. The Lord is not such if he doesn't kill. Can't you love anything without breaking it for fear of losing it all? Creon: What if Thebes ended up in the hands of terrorists? Would you not care? Antigone. Ah, you lords always threaten us the city would fall, dismembered by the foreigner's hand, and so we keep our heads down, and you are free to commit all manner of atrocities. The city is disintegrating, yet because we bow to you, we cannot see what we are heading towards. We only see the earth crumbling beneath our feet. That the conflict between Creon and Chorus and on the one side and Antigone and Tiresias on the other is a gendered one is also evident in Creon's own words justifying his actions to Haemon. I am obliged to let her die. This is what being a man is like, my son. If they turn against me at home, what can I expect from the rest of the citizens? Strict with everyone or strict with no one. There is no greater plague than anarchy. It ruins cities, burns families, and if the anarchist is a woman, the danger is even greater. I'd rather succumb at the hands of a man than be told that I have surrendered to a woman. They should be keepers of the fireplace, not sowers of discord. Do you think it should be the people telling me how to be a leader? Should others lead the country instead? The role of the chorus as the blind supporter of the populist tyrant, as the community who either believes in his demagogy or supports him for fear of retaliation, is one of the most convincing innovations that Ali Farah introduces, with the clash between Antigone and the chorus dominating most of the play. In this passage, Antigone is scorned by the chorus as she is sent to her death, and she responds by denouncing the chorus as a colonizer. Chorus, you have brought this upon yourself. You violated justice. It is because of your pride that you are lost. Burials are sacred, yes, but one must not disobey the powers that be. Bend to your destiny. Antigone, speak not of fate, but rather of those who condemn me as an innocent. You who have followed Creon in his war of invasion, you who pretend to export democracy, yet are only interested in defending your wealth while robbing gas and oil. You will see the holds of your ships return not full but empty. O Thebes, my city, how my heart tightens for the fate that awaits you. Thebans, to those who ask you about me, say, we saw her enter her own tomb. With this line delivered by Antigone to the chorus, Ali Farah draws a parallel between Italians and Europeans of the past who enacted the colonization of Somalia and those who today continue to enforce neocolonial domination by exploiting African resources, yet refuse any responsibility towards migrants from former colonies. This is a play that confronts the histories of Italian colonialism, yet positions the voice of the anti-colonialist as the defeated idealist, and as its mad other, who never had a chance to succeed within dominant structures of power. As Odai Johnson has argued about Greek theatre post-Phrynichus in his book Ruins, classical Athenian tragedy stages the wailing of others, not ours, and carries with it a certain contract of forgetting. As a mechanism aimed at eliciting emotions, Greek tragedy is set up to position the audience as a voyeur of someone else's pain, the sorrow of others, one can empathize with at an arm's length, but not entirely identify with. According to Johnson, the heroes of Greek tragedy are always conceived as others, never us, which is what eventually backfired in this performance. Literature and theatre play a key role in shaping constructions and ideas about national belonging and identity in relation to race. In this play, Ali Farah addresses a reader who is capable of seeing Thebes as a superimposition of Palermo and Mogadishu, a diasporic reader and an audience member, an anti-racist reader and audience member. While there is no mention of the characters' ethnic backgrounds in Ali Farah's script, the staged version of the play would have to exist in the realm of embodiment, without the luxury of indeterminacy, and where a mostly, if not entirely white audience would observe the pain and demise of a black Antigone. Before I move on to analyze how these power dynamics played out on stage, I want to say a few words on the history of Italian colonialism in order to offer a fuller picture of what kind of symbolism was at stake during Sutta Scupa's production. When contemporary Italy looks at itself in the mirror, it sees a country of good people who, historically speaking, never caused any harm to any other populations. The lack of debate and gaps in school curricula around these topics have created a whole society and political class struck by selective historical amnesia. Writer and activist Ubah Cristina, born and raised in Italy by Somali parents, describes the state of the debate around colonialism with the following words. Italians have raped, killed, derided, polluted, pillaged, humiliated the people they came in contact with. They acted like the British, the French, the Belgians, the Germans, the Americans, Spanish and Portuguese. But in many of these countries, after World War II, there have been discussions, reckonings, debates have been bitter and difficult. People have interrogated themselves about imperialism and its crimes. Studies have been published. The debate has influenced literary productions as well as essays, films, music. In Italy, however, there has been silence, like nothing had ever happened. Italy's recent colonial past is routinely dismissed as a fascist oddity, which was never as evil as the Spanish, French, or British brands of colonialism, never had the support of the people, and was quickly abandoned when, after World War II, the UN stripped Italy of most of its former colonies. In 1945, when Italy was liberated from fascism by the Americans and became a republic, it adopted a left-leaning progressive constitution. At the time, by expelling the fascists, Italians brushed aside their supposedly failed colonial fantasies. While fascism is studied in schools, remembered for its atrocities towards minorities, discussed in public fora, and there is a strong tradition of anti-fascism in the country, colonialism has been entirely swept under the carpet, and the notion of black Italianità or Afro-Italianness is entirely alien to the general population. For historical accuracy, however, it must be noted that Italy tried unsuccessfully to occupy several areas of Africa, Europe and Asia over the late 19th and early 20th century, that is, before Mussolini came to power. Italy's colonialism started around 1890, where the Italian government made an agreement with Great Britain to acquire a small region of Eritrea on the Red Sea. Later, it went on to become quite a successful colonial power in the Horn of Africa. In the pre-fascist era, Italy had already conquered parts of Eritrea, Somalia, and Libya. Chronicles from this period see Italy trying to acquire colonies not only via land occupations, but also through diplomatic means, negotiating with Portuguese, French, Spanish, and British authorities. Studies have also found that throughout Italy's rule in Eritrea and Somalia, the despicable practice of madamato, that is, of Italian colonial soldiers buying Eritrean, Libyan, and Somalian women, often as young as 12 years old, to exploit them as providers of domestic and sex labor, was widespread, leading to a whole generation of mixed-race children who were abandoned by colonial fathers until the fascist Italian government prohibited the practice in order to preserve the purity of the Italian race in 1937. During the fascist period from 1922 to the early 1940s, Mussolini consolidated the colonial project by invading Abyssinia and established in the Horn of Africa as Italy's so-called place in the sun, officially known as Africa Orientale Italiana. Italy carried out all manner of atrocities inspired by racist ideologies to conquer its African colonies, including the use of illegal chemical weapons. With the fall of Mussolini from 1941, Italy was expelled from East Africa, and Britain and the Commonwealth acquired all Italian possessions in the region. In 1947, the Treaty of Paris officially stripped Italy of the colonies it had acquired under the fascist period, while the pre-fascist ones were redistributed by the UN between Greece, France, and Britain. Italy retained a protectorate of Somalia in the transition period from 1950 to its independence in 1960, when Project Amnesia, or the erasure of this chapter in Italian history from social memory, started in earnest. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the production finally. Theatre in Italy is an overwhelmingly white space, as I've already said, both on and off stage, but especially in the stalls. Here, any attempt at staging so-called ethnic minorities, characters inevitably sets up a voyeuristic relationship between performers and audiences, whereby black characters and performers are consumed as visual spectacle by white audiences. This is precisely what had happened at the staging of Antigone Power, where despite attempts to engage second generations as well as the migrant and refugees communities in Palermo, the vast majority of audiences were white, as recalled by Ali Farah. But the perils of appropriation did not end there, and were exacerbated by artistic decisions such as casting, multilingualism, and dramaturgy, despite these being in good faith and with good intentions. In the hands of Sutta Scupa and their artistic collaborators, Ali Farah's script, her words, her tone, her tempo, her characters, and the relationships between them were transformed into an entirely different proposition. Firstly, the casting exacerbated power imbalances. Two professional white actors were cast in the role of Creon and Tiresias. They spoke Italian and Palermitan dialect respectively on stage, which are languages understood by the audience. The chorus, performed by a mixed group of semi-professional white Italians and black asylum seekers, spoke Italian as well, while Antigone and Ismene were played by two asylum seekers who had recently arrived from Nigeria and were speaking Esan and Pidgin English respectively, with the lines translated by the performers themselves. Antigone's and Ismene's lines were heavily cut, so they both had fewer lines than in Ali Farah's script, while Creon's and Tiresias' lines were rewritten and expanded in length. As a consequence of this, the power imbalance between Creon and Antigone had increased manifold. King Creon was played by an older man, a white Italian native speaker, a professional actor with many more lines to deliver than his counterpart, Glory, a young black woman who had just arrived in Italy as a refugee, who spoke little, if any, Italian, and whose livelihood was now in the hands of an institutionally racist state. Most crucially, Glory's representation of herself as Antigone was filtered through Sutta Scupa's rewriting of the play prior to rehearsals. And despite Glory's raw talent and her forceful stage presence, this was a setup for her. There was no way she was going to come out on top. As if this wasn't enough, Glory's Antigone was made to suffer even more humiliating injuries in front of an exoticizing gaze. The chorus, who in Ali Farah's script firmly but politely condemns Antigone's action, became a bad-mouthed mob, viciously insulting Antigone and calling her sexist names throughout the performance. Yet the last stroke was delivered by the characterization of Creon as a heinous, lecherous leader, bare-chested, covered in blood and sweat, at one point approaching and groping Antigone as if to sexually assault her. While he has his head on her breast, exploiting his position of power and her position as minoritized, sexualized, objectified human being, Glory's Antigone freezes, then slaps Creon in the face. Creon metamorphoses from Ali Farah's cold-blooded ruler to Sutta Scupa's slimy, debauched predator had been the subject of heated disagreements between writer and director. When I conveyed my grievances to Massa, I shared that while I was watching the video of the production, I had cringed and was horrified at what Glory had to go through. I asked Massa why he had staged such a weak, powerless Antigone, who is not only condemned to death for her actions, but is repeatedly insulted and sexually harassed on stage. His response was that he did not think Antigone had become weak in his staging. On the contrary, she was very strong. He stated, "My objective, and I believe Ubah's too, was to humanize as much as possible a heroine who could have come across of a cartoon like Wonder Woman. The fact that you suffered with Antigone makes me happy. That was precisely my intention. Instead of turning Antigone into a Wonder Woman cartoon, the production had turned Creon into a Harvey Weinstein cartoon. But my suffering with or for Antigone was not the point. Who stood to gain from seeing Creon sexually harass Antigone? Who was going to benefit from this trite reiteration of this sexist, racist, and colonialist status quo? In recent years, and certainly more decisively since the 2010s, both scholars and theatre makers in the UK and the US have drawn the field's attention to the oppressive mechanism known as the white gaze, which emerges out of the dominance of white-centric perspectives, structures, and audiences in every aspect of society, including the theatre. The white gaze, which is as pervasive as the male and cis gaze, creates a double bind by which both white and black artists are incentivized to work for a predominantly white audience who will prefer, reward, and enjoy stereotypical representations of black characters and their suffering on stage. Like the male gaze wants to see women objectified and dehumanized, the white gaze wants to see black pain, oppression, trauma, and death. Among the many scholars I could quote here, there is the African-American performance theorist Harvey Young, whose work centers on the performance of race. In his 2019 keynote at the Theatre and Performance Research Association, entitled Undead Performance, Staging Black Life, Young examined the problematic history of the spectacle of Black death on the American stage, arguing how the hyper-visibility of dead black bodies and black trauma on stage acts as one of the pillars that continue to prop up structural racism in America. Among the many theatre makers who have dealt with the particularly insidious issue of the white gaze in the UK, playwright and performer Arinze Kene has formulated what must be one of the most compelling direct responses through his one-man show Misty in 2018, directed by Omar Alarian. In the preface to the play, Kene takes issue with and deconstructs the concept of black play that his friend Raymond introduces in casual conversation, as if there were black plays and white plays, or plays for black audiences and plays for white audiences, depending on whether the characters, audiences, and writers are black or white. Shouldn't all plays be for everyone? Asks Arinze. In the play itself, Arinze's friend Raymond and his partner Donna, who have just attended a play within the play by Arinze, are compelled to leave some feedback to Arinze on his answering machine. The play within the play is supposedly based on the story in which a black boy beats someone up on a night bus. Raymond and Donna's voicemail is as follows. Raymond. Arinze, hey dude, it is Raymond here. Sorry I didn't stick around last night to give you feedback. Bro, I hope you appreciate me telling you this as a friend. I had issues with your stories. I mean, the whole guy beats someone up on a night bus thing. It felt like another Donna. Generic, angry young black man. Raymond. I looked around and most of them don't look like us. Donna. They seem to love it. Raymond. As soon as we walked out, Donna turned to me and said, Arinze sold out and wrote an urban play. Donna. Nah, that's not what I said. I said Arinze sold out and wrote an N-word play. You wrote an N-word play so your work could get on. Ain't nothing but a modern minstrel show. What has this got to do with our Antigone, you may ask? Well, I started this paper with the question whether Greek tragedy can be used as a weapon to topple racism. My answer is potentially, if the conditions are right, if the insidious mechanisms of the white gaze are exposed rather than espoused, uncovered rather than upheld, confronted rather than confirmed. This requires black Italian theatre makers to take control of the narrative and avoid modern minstrel shows at all costs, even if this is what white audiences want. ultimately centering Creon as the indecent oppressor and colonizer of a sexualized black Antigone, does nothing more than reproduce and uphold the very systems it is denouncing. The structural racism that supports the Italian theatre ecosystem and the neo-colonial mentality that underpins Italian politics. Having reached this assessment, I raise my hands and bow out, knowing that my own paper's spectacularization of the spectacularization is fully implicated in the survival of structural racism. Only I am aware of it and wish to draw my own attention and yours to the dangers of not knowing. Thank you.